Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at After Effects, and this is just an overview of After Effects and what each of the panels are. So when you first open After Effects you'll see a screen similar to this where you can start a new project or open a project. I'm just going to actually close this, and this is actually After Effects. So what you will see might be different to this. You might see the default view, which looks more like this. And your panels may differ as well. But essentially what you're going to have is a project panel. This is where all your files are going to be stored. So this is a list of all your compositions, all of your assets will appear in here. Here down here we have the timeline. This is where we actually edit our files, do all our animation, add our keyframes and work with our layers. We will see different tabs across here for each of the different compositions we're working in. This is our composition window. This is where you will see the effects of what you're working on down here. And when you don't have a composition to work with, you'll see this, where you, these quick actions where you can create a new composition or create a new composition from footage if you are working with video footage. On the right here, you won't see this smart anchor one because this is a plugin, but you will see the rest. You will see info, audio, preview, which is useful for your play buttons and things like that. Your effects panel, your libraries, characters, paragraph, tracker, align, all this good stuff. If you head up to the top, which you won't be able to see because it's out of the recording, you have a window. And if you click window, you can find all your extensions. So the AEUX, which you probably won't be using in After Effects, you'll probably be using this plugin more in Figma. You won't have this one or this one, but you hopefully will have LottieFiles. So essentially you will need this one and this one to be following along with this tutorial. So if you haven't done that yet, go back into the Notion document and find the links to install both of these. If at any point in the tutorial I ask you to go to a line or something like that and it's not over here, you can probably find it in window. So you'll be able to find a line up here or any of the other things that you might need. When we go to use Lottie, you'll be going to LottieFiles plugin inside extensions. And I think that is it. If you install any plugins, they might appear down here or they might appear in extensions. You also have a link to your workspaces up here, but you can also access them from up here, like so. So I suggest setting it as default, or if you're following along with this tutorial, I believe I use the small screen. You won't have this flow. We'll be doing all our curve animation from this tool down here, as this is a paid for plugin. So I just go back to default. So if I open up a project quickly so we can take a look more what it looks like when we're actually working on something. So if I just go to open a recent project, and what have we got? Let's open this Face ID one that I was working on recently. So over here we can see I use the AEUX plugin, and therefore when I sent stuff from Figma, it created this folder and then a subfolder based on whatever the frame in Figma was called, and then these are my compositions. So if we open up a composition, such as this fail one down here, which was actually already open, we can open another one and we can see there's multiple tabs now. A composition is kind of a way of thinking it's creating a video, and inside there is all your working files, all your layers, everything you're working with, all your assets. And we can see these marks on the timeline here are actually the keyframes, and your keyframes will either look like this or they will look like a blue diamond like this. So the blue diamond just means it's a standard keyframe. If it looks kind of like this, it means it's got an animation curve applied to it. So I'm just going to go back to default so we don't have that flow view. So to see those curves, we can click here into the graph editor and we can see there are some nice curves. If I was to select all of these, remove those curves, so it's just a straight linear there, we can see that it's actually turned back to the default keyframe, which when you add a keyframe, this is what you'll see. So let's add a keyframe now. Okay, so we can see I've selected the right eye here, and at 40 frames, I'm going to move it all the way over here and all the way up here. And we can see it now between those two keyframes, it moves like so. If we go into the graph editor, we could then apply a nice curve to it. And then we can see the keyframe changes here, and how the animation works also changes. So I'm just going to undo all of that. So you can grab the playhead here and scrub through your timeline. And we can see this timeline is set to 3 seconds. So to change the composition length, you can press Command K or Control K. And here in our composition settings, we've got all the controls to change everything, such as the composition name, which is the name you see here. You can change the width and height based on pixels. You can lock the aspect ratio if you so wish. You can also change the frame rate. I recommend keeping the same frame rate for all compositions inside a file, just so that they work together nicely. And if you're working on a Lottie file, I would suggest using 60 frames per second because it looks really nice and smooth. You can change the background color, and this is where you can change the time. So currently it's set to 3 seconds. We could change that to 6 seconds to double it, or whatever we want, whatever we need it to be. So I'm going to leave that for now. So if we look down into our composition here, we can see we've got lots of different layers. Let's take a look a little closer at this mouth layer. If I expand it, we can see we've got contents, and inside our contents, we've got the name of the actual layer. We've got a path, which you can think of inside Figma is the vector path that you would draw with the pen tool. The fill, which is what applies the color to that path. And then we've got the transform. So inside the transform, you've got things like your anchor point, your position, the scale, which is most likely going to be 100%. You can skew it, you can rotate it, and you can change the opacity. And that's actually inside the layer itself, inside the contents. But then we also have this transform on top, which is for the entire thing. So transform applies to this, transform inside here applies to this. So you could have transforms within the entire model, or you could apply kind of scales, position, things like that to the entire layer. So if I expand that, we can see the anchor point, which is essentially this point here. So it's directly in the center of the layer. If we were to move that anchor point, we can see it moves the layer because the anchor point is now shifted to the left or to the right. I suggest just leaving it as default unless you need to specifically rotate it from a corner or size it from a different corner, something like that. Position, I think, is pretty straightforward. As you can see, it's got this blue stopwatch on it, which means that anytime I make a change on here, it's going to automatically apply a keyframe for me, like so. So I'm just going to undo that with Command Z. If I was to turn that off, it removes all the keyframes because they were all applied automatically, and I would need to apply a manual keyframe each time I wanted to add one, but I'm going to add them back in. So that means that you're actually animating this. If it's unchecked, you won't be adding keyframes inside the timeline. So you need to have this checked if you want to be animating. That's so that you can play around with things like rotation and it doesn't actually apply a keyframe. It just rotates it. So the difference, let me just show you what the difference is. So applying a rotation here, let's add 45 degrees. We can see there's no keyframes being added to the timeline, and it's just changed that position by default. If I undo that and then add the stopwatch, move that keyframe to 0, and then leave our playhead here and add 45 degrees again, we can actually see that now it's going to animate between 0 and 45 between these two keyframes here. And let's uncheck that. Scale's pretty standard. It's going to resize it. We've got this little link button here, which means it's going to uniformly scale. If we turn that off, we can just scale by width or by height. Just get that back to 100%. If you drag your playhead to the beginning and then we press the spacebar, that will actually play the animation. And it will just keep looping that animation because that's what we have it set to over here in our preview. You can change how the preview works over here. I suggest leaving it as it is. You might see this green bar up here. This means that everything has already been rendered. So when you press space or play over here, it will play at real time correctly. If this green bar up here is choppy, so it's got sections missing, it means that not everything has been rendered into your RAM yet, and it might need to play through a couple of times or maybe at least one time before it can render before it will play properly. So the animation might also play a bit choppy. So let's see if we can just have that show. So you can see that green bar has now gone dark gray, and because this is a simple animation, it should render pretty quickly. So when I press space, you'll see that green bar appears pretty quickly. But as your animations get more and more complicated, this render will take longer and longer. So to save, again, you won't be able to see this, but if you go up to File, you can then go to Save As, you can import, you can export. So if you want to export it as a video, you can do that from here. You can open your other projects as well. Let's just uncheck that one. So how might you use a composition? So we've got our composition here. So we've got this face ID fail, and let's play the animation again. So that's our animation inside the face ID fail composition. So if we go up to our fail one here and then new comp from selection, so that's created another composition with the other composition inside of it. So that's still our face ID fail, but we've got a new composition with that composition inside of it. And what we can do here is we can, for example, change the background color to a red. And it hasn't affected this one. So we're still playing this animation inside this one, but what we could potentially do is then animate this composition as well. So if I do a quick scale, so I've just pressed S on the keyboard, I'm going to add a 0 there. I'm going to, at 1 second, make it zoom in. Then at 2 seconds, I'm going to make it zoom out. And then at 3 seconds, I'm going to put it back to normal. And then if I play that, we can see it's going to animate that, but it hasn't changed our face ID animation at all here. So this animation is still playing as normal, nothing's changed here, but we've actually animated the composition inside another composition. So what you can do there is you can really save time. You can reuse compositions inside other compositions, or you can do more complicated animations inside one and then apply global animations to the entire animation as so. And you'll be learning more about this as we do this tutorial. So I think that covers everything you'll need for this tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions. Put comments on the video, put them in the Notion document if you're following the tutorial from there, or just send me a direct message. Thanks for watching.